In the harsh times of the Wild West, the treatment of captive women by the Apache tribe was truly brutal. This grim chapter in history included acts of violence, rape, mutilation, and murder that are deeply disturbing. Let's delve into the heartbreaking reality of the most severe hardships suffered by women at the hands of the Apache. The Apache tribe was notorious for their raids on other tribes and European settlements. Unfortunately, when they captured women, they subjected them to unimaginable suffering. These women endured physical and sexual assaults, and some were even forced into slavery. The Apache tribe showed no mercy, exploiting these women for their own gain. The captive women faced even more challenges during their forced journeys. They were made to travel long distances without enough food and supplies, which led to immense suffering. Hunger, thirst, and exposure to harsh conditions made their already unbearable situation even worse. To the Apache tribe, these captive women were seen as valuable possessions to be used for various purposes. Sadly, sexual exploitation was one of the grim fates that these unfortunate women had to endure. The Apache tribe used them solely for their own sexual pleasure, without any regard for their well-being or dignity. In addition to their suffering, the captive women were forced into labor, working under oppressive conditions for the benefit of their captors. At certain times, Apache warriors would marry or have these women as concubines, making them a part of Apache society, but often in a subservient and degrading role: slavery. It's crucial to acknowledge that the experiences of captive women within Apache society varied widely. Some found themselves sold into slavery, while others were traded to different tribes or European settlers. The demand for female captives was particularly high. In the bustling slave markets of regions like Mexico and the American Southwest, inside Apache communities, women held pivotal roles. Some became wives, signifying deep and enduring relationships. These women shouldered responsibilities such as caring for children, managing households, and providing support to their husbands in various ways. On the other hand, some women became concubines, occupying a secondary position with potentially less stability and fewer rights than wives. The dynamics of these relationships depended on the circumstances and personal preferences of those involved. However, it's important to understand that not all captive women had favorable outcomes. Those who were sold into slavery faced a harsh and bleak destiny. They were forcibly torn from their families and communities, becoming the property of slave owners who exploited them for labor and various other purposes. The separation from their loved ones and the hardships they endured were deeply distressing and marked by suffering. Captives. Regrettably, during those historical times, there existed a significant demand for female slaves, and these women were considered highly prized possessions. This was particularly pronounced in regions like Mexico and the American Southwest, where captive women held substantial value in the eyes of their captors. Life as a captive woman was an incredibly harsh and brutal ordeal. For those who weren't sold into slavery or forced into marriages, these women endured not only physical but also severe sexual abuse at the hands of their captors. Their daily existence was marked by grueling long marches and exposure to unforgiving and harsh environmental conditions. These circumstances made their suffering all the more unbearable. The situation for captive women was genuinely dire. They were stripped of their freedom, and their fate was entirely at the mercy of their captors. The constant and severe physical abuse they endured left not only physical but also deep emotional scars. These women were treated as mere objects, devoid of any consideration for their dignity or humanity. In addition to the physical torment, the captives were subjected to exhausting journeys on foot. During these arduous treks that spanned days or even weeks, they faced relentless hunger, excruciating thirst, and overwhelming exhaustion while navigating treacherous terrains. Their bodies, already weakened by the trauma they endured, were pushed to their limits, causing even more distress and agony. Furthermore, the living conditions for these captive women were nothing short of appalling. They were often confined to overcrowded and unsanitary spaces that utterly lacked the basic necessities required for survival. The grim reality of their existence was one characterized by relentless suffering and abject despair. Mutilation. The absence of proper food, clean water, and adequate shelter only intensified the suffering of captive women, making their already vulnerable state even more precarious. Now let's delve deeper into the harrowing punishment methods employed by the Apache tribe during those turbulent times. These brutal techniques were wielded to instill fear, assert dominance, and inflict deep humiliation upon their captives. Among the most horrifying methods used by the Apache was mutilation. This gruesome practice involved the ruthless cutting off of body parts, such as fingers, toes, ears, noses, and even genitalia, employing sharp and unforgiving instruments to ensure their captives couldn't escape the torment. They were often tightly restrained, leaving them defenseless. The Apache raiders, disturbingly, derived sadistic pleasure from inflicting immense pain and suffering upon their captives. Mutilation served two chilling purposes. Firstly, it was a means to weaken their adversaries by disfiguring and disabling them in the most brutal manner imaginable. By severing essential body parts, this cruel act profoundly undermined their adversaries' physical abilities, rendering them significantly weaker. This merciless act of mutilation sent a chilling message about the Apache's capacity to incapacitate their enemies with ruthless precision. Secondly, mutilation was a method of intimidation, intended to instill paralyzing fear in anyone who dared oppose them. By subjecting captives to such horrifying and gruesome acts, the Apache conveyed a stark and chilling warning. The sight of these mutilated individuals served as a haunting reminder of the dire consequences of challenging Apache authority. It was a visceral and horrifying illustration of the ruthlessness and brutality that the Apache could inflict upon those unfortunate enough to cross their path. Burning. The Apache people also employed a deeply disturbing punishment known as burning. In this cruel practice, victims were tightly bound to stakes or posts and subjected to a horrifying ordeal. They were set on fire, inflicting excruciating pain. What added to the psychological horror was that this gruesome spectacle was often carried out in front of others, turning it into a traumatic event for both the victim and any witnesses. What made the Apache particularly feared was their use of slow-burning fires. They deliberately extended the duration of the burning, prolonging the victim's suffering in a way that defies imagination. The excruciating and enduring pain inflicted by these fires was profoundly terrifying, leaving a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. In addition to slow-burning fires, the Apache had another torture method called torture fires. This involved heating metal objects like branding irons to searing temperatures and pressing them mercilessly against the victim's skin. The result was severe burns and unimaginable pain, a torment that words can hardly capture. The use of burning as a form of punishment went beyond mere physical agony. It served a more sinister purpose: to humiliate and degrade the victims, asserting dominance and instilling fear in anyone who witnessed it. This cruel act was a deliberate and calculated means of reinforcing the Apache's authority and showcasing their brutality in a horrifying display of power. The Gauntlet. The gauntlet, a brutal tradition practiced by certain tribes like the Apache, paints a grim picture of their customs. In this cruel practice, a captive would find themselves in a nightmarish ordeal, forced to run between two rows of warriors. These warriors eagerly awaited their turn to strike the victim with weapons, unleashing a torrent of violence. The purpose behind this cruel act was twofold. First, to break the captive's spirit, and second, to demonstrate the tribe's absolute dominance. The Apache, renowned for their savage tactics, also employed the gruesome practice of scalping. In this horrifying act, they would cut the scalp from a victim's head while the person was still alive. The pain and terror inflicted during this barbaric act were unimaginable. For the Apache, scalping held deep beliefs and symbolism. It symbolized their triumph over enemies and served as a powerful assertion of their dominance. To showcase their victories, the Apache took pride in displaying these scalps as macabre trophies. These grim tokens served as chilling proof of their conquests and acts of dominance, leaving no room for doubt about their ferocity. In a disturbing celebration of their dominance, the triumphant Apache accompanied these scalp displays with celebratory dances and chants. These rituals highlighted their strength and superiority, serving as a chilling testament to their ruthlessness and might. The ant hill. The Apache people had a punishment method known as anting, which plunges us into the depths of cruelty. In this brutal practice, captives were bound tightly to ant hills. their faces positioned either upward or downward. What followed was an excruciating ordeal, as the captives endured relentless ant bites and stings. The Apache believed that the venom injected by these antis would eventually serve as a form of revenge against their enemies. This form of punishment, however, transcended the pain caused solely by ant attacks. The victims would remain bound to these ant hills for agonizingly long hours, and sometimes even days, experiencing prolonged and unbearable agony. They were left entirely exposed to the unforgiving elements, with no respite. Dehydration, hunger, and the relentless forces of nature bore down on them. Bound to the ant hill, these captives were rendered utterly defenseless against extreme weather conditions. They had no shelter or protection from the scorching heat, biting cold, blistering sun, or bone-chilling winds. This heightened their suffering to levels that are difficult to comprehend. In addition to the ceaseless ant attacks and exposure to extreme weather, the victims also grappled with the torment of thirst and hunger. They were deliberately denied water and food, leading to agonizing dehydration and malnutrition. The effects of this deliberate cruelty were slow and agonizing, further deteriorating the captives' physical and mental well-being. The Apache's practice of anting was not a swift punishment, but a methodical and extended process, intentionally designed to maximize the suffering endured by the captives, leaving a chilling mark on the annals of history. Revenge. The Apache sought vengeance by subjecting their enemies to prolonged suffering, exacting the highest price for their deed. Their use of brutal and agonizing methods reveals the harsh reality of a world where there were no laws to curtail such atrocities. These methods encompassed physical and sexual abuse, mutilation, burning, the gauntlet, scalping, and anting. These heinous acts were not merely acts of cruelty, but had a more sinister purpose: to instill paralyzing fear, establish unchallenged dominance, and strip captives of their dignity. These chilling practices unveil the staggering extent of suffering within Apache society, serving as stark reminders of the immense human cost incurred during intertribal conflicts and colonization. Captive women among the Apache people provide us with a poignant glimpse into the harrowing consequences of historical conflicts and the colonization of Native American lands. Their experiences stand as painful testaments to the profound impact of cultural clashes and conquests that have left an indelible mark on history. Through the study of this dark chapter in Native American history, we endeavor to gain a deeper understanding of the intricate factors that shaped the past. Given the array of punishment methods employed, it is indeed challenging to single out the most gruesome one. Each of these techniques inflicted unimaginable suffering and horror upon its victims. However, it is imperative to recognize the collective trauma endured by both individuals and entire communities during this tumultuous era. The examination of these cruel practices not only aids in our comprehension of the victim's plight, but also enables us to grasp the monumental challenges faced by indigenous peoples during this tumultuous period. We extend our gratitude to you for viewing our presentation on the most brutal punishments inflicted upon women by the Apache tribe during the Wild West era. Our hope is that shedding light on the devastating human toll resulting from intertribal conflicts and colonization will serve as a reminder of the profound importance of understanding and acknowledging this dark facet of history. Thanks for watching the video, and if you found it informative, please like and subscribe to Time Capsule for similar content. We look forward to sharing more knowledge with you in the future. Until then, take care.